Imagine a major corporation, and they are seeking to fill an important position within the corporation. Maybe the president or the CEO or some other high-ranking official in this very prestigious major corporation. I'm sure, although I've never been involved in anything like that, I'm sure that when they do that, they put together a checklist of essential qualities that they'd be looking for in a man to fill this very important high-ranking position. They would want to specify some things about the kind of experience that he has had in his working career. They'd probably want to know something about his education, the levels of education that he's attained to, and such as that. What we're saying is that if you were going to hire a high-ranking, important person in a big major corporation, you wouldn't just go out on the street and hire anybody that walked past. You just wouldn't do that, right? You're going to be more selective, and you're going to try to find persons who are qualified for the task at hand. All right, what about us then? Here we are in the Lord's church and in a local congregation. I'm going to tell you, this particular local congregation and every congregation of God's people, wherever they may meet, this is more important than that major corporation. What we do and the work that we're engaged in and the principles and priorities that we have and that we pursue, more important than any corporation in the world. When we're looking for leadership within a local congregation, then it's not, just like that corporation is not going to go out and just hire anybody that they find walking down the street. Same is true here. We're not going to just appoint just anyone to the leadership of a local congregation. There are rigid requirements, qualifications as we often term them, and we are studying about that right now. And tonight we want to continue our study that we began last week as we're looking to the qualifications of elders. Those of you who are members here obviously know that we are desirous of being able to attain to that. Again, we've had elders in the past, but for some time recently we have not had elders. We want to be able to appoint elders again if that's possible to do so. And because of that, the men of the congregation in our recent meeting asked me to preach these lessons, reviewing again, although we've been through these things before, reviewing again the qualifications of elders with the hope that that will put us one step closer to being able to attain to that goal of having elders. And so we continue our study tonight. We stopped just for a minute to thank you all for being here. What a beautiful, absolutely beautiful Lord's Day we have had in Middle Tennessee. You couldn't have written a script for a better weather day than we've enjoyed today. It's just beautiful. And God's creation is in all of its glory at this time in the spring. And then on top of that, we've had the additional blessing of being able to assemble together to worship God. It's just a good day. And we're privileged and blessed, and we should always remember so. We hope that all that we do tonight will be to God's honor and glory, and that each of us will be taught and instructed and encouraged in important spiritual things. And so we're studying about the eldership. By the way, thanks to our visitors. I should have said that. Thanks to our visitors for being here tonight too. We're very glad that you've come. So as we continue our study of the elders and talk about the qualifications of elders, I just remind you of what we talked about last Sunday evening, and they were some of the easier qualifications to pin down. For instance, it's not very controversial when the Scripture says if a man desires the office of a bishop, it's got to be a man. Now, we don't have any quibble or problem with that, although I know that in some major denominations, they are debating strongly about the role of women and especially leadership roles for women. We don't have that debate among our number. We understand it's to be a man. He is to desire the office. We talked about that desire that he should have to do the work that can be done if he's qualified and able. He needs to be a blameless man, above reproach. You do not suspect him of doing anything out of the way or evil or sinful. He's to be the husband of one wife. He's a married man, and he rules well his own family. The family is sort of a testing ground for this man's leadership abilities. And if he's not able to rule his own family well, the text says, how could we expect him to have charge of God's household if he's not able to control his own household? He rules his own family well. All right, so we talked about those things last week. And by the way, if you happen to have missed that, You can go back and review what we talked about. As you know, we're streaming our services on YouTube now, and as soon as the live stream of the services has ended, that just automatically rolls over into an archive file, and you can go to our page, our channel on YouTube, or you can go to our homepage at collegeview.com and find the link to our YouTube channel, and these lessons are archived there. And so if you want to go back and look and revisit those, you certainly can do so. But we continue with some additional qualifications. We're not going to get them all tonight either. We're going to have to continue our study longer than tonight, but let's tackle some more of these qualifications. Remember, the qualifications are found in Titus 1, where Trenton read for us earlier, and they're found in 1 Timothy 3. Those are the two important texts, and we'll be referring to those just constantly throughout our study. The one that we want to study now is one that is more controversial, and more discussion comes up regarding this qualification than maybe any other of the qualifications. The man is to have faithful children. There's really, I think, several things that are critical in considering this qualification. Let's look to the text. Titus 1 verse 6 says, "Blameless, the husband of one wife, having faithful children, not accused of riot or unruly." And then in Timothy, 1 Timothy 3 verse 4, "One that ruleth his own house well, having his children in subjection with all gravity. For if a man know not how to rule his own house, how can he take care of the church of God?" Now, the first thing that we want to address is the question about how many children he must have. And specifically, the question that always comes up is, would a man who has just one child be qualified as having children? Obviously, it's not an issue. If he's got two or more, there's no issue about that. But the question is, what if he has just one? Well, first of all, obviously he has to have children, right? Very first baseline consideration is he must have children. But the question is, would one qualify him, or must there be a plurality, more than one, two or more? What about that? That's the question. And notice both texts refer to children. And so the question is asked, would one child qualify? I know that people differ on this question, so all I know to do is give my understanding and try to explain why I understand it the way that I do. If you differ with me about that, I'll be very sensitive to your considerations as well. But in my view, a man with one child meets the qualification of having children. All right? We're just talking, first of all, about whether he has children or not. I think the very easiest way for us to illustrate that, we often do this, if you were to ask a fellow who had just one child, I'll use Dale Lindsay as an example. Dale has one son, Hunter, and he's sitting there. If I were to ask Dale, I don't know Dale. Dale, you got any children? Dale, do you have children? Or maybe Dale's filling out a form where he's making an application. Do you have children? How would Dale answer that question? Dale, do you have children? Dale wouldn't say no. That'd be the wrong answer, right? We would expect Dale to say, yes, I have a son. And so the question, does Dale have children? The answer that we would all agree to is, yes, Dale has children. He has a son. That's the way we use language. And I think that we can illustrate from the Bible that that's the way the Bible uses that terminology as well. And so I'm going to review with you some classic arguments that we've talked about before. But one that I think helps us with this is from way back in the Old Testament, Genesis 21, verse 5 beginning. "Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born unto him. And Sarah said, Who would have said unto Abraham that Sarah should have given children suck? For I have borne him a son in his old age." Look, who would have thought that Sarah should have given children suck? How many children did Sarah have anyway? Sarah had one, right? She had a son. She gave Abraham a son in his old age. Who would have thought that Sarah would nurse children? "But I did," she said. "I gave him a son." You see how that terminology is used there? Did Sarah have children? Yes, she had a son, right? And so what we're illustrating is in the Bible we see that kind of same sort of usage and understanding that we have in language today. Here's an argument concerning Jesus and his teaching. Jesus made reference to the law of Moses. And he said in Matthew 22, beginning verse 23, Moses said, if a man die having no children, his brother shall marry his wife and raise up seed unto his brother. So Jesus is referencing what Moses taught. We understand that was a condition of the law of Moses, that if a man died and he had no children, then his brother would marry his widow and raise up seed to the dead man's name, right? That's the way that worked, and it had to do with the passing on of inheritances and so forth. Well, Jesus' reference goes back to Deuteronomy chapter 25, verse 5. If brethren dwell together and one of them die and have no child, the wife of the dead shall not marry without unto a stranger. Her husband's brother shall go in unto her and take her to him to wife and perform the duty of a husband's brother unto her. You see something there? When Jesus referenced Moses, he said no children, but the actual statement in Deuteronomy is no child. See any problem with that? There's really not a problem, is there? What would have been the case of a man who had one child and he died? If he had one child, his brother would not have been obligated to marry the widow, right? One child would have sufficed concerning that. But what I'm really interested in is see how these terms are used interchangeably? A man dies, has no child. Jesus said having no children, and it means exactly the same thing. One child would qualify. And so let's go back to our text again, and the very basic question, would one child qualify? I think the answer is yes. That's how we use language. It's how language is used in the Bible. A man with one child has children. I think that's pretty straightforward. Now, to me, that's the easier question to answer. Would you prefer that a man had more than one child? Well, I don't know. Maybe you could say, my preference is that he has two or more. My preference is that he has a dozen or more. I don't know. But you're just stating a preference, right? You might state your preference. I think it'd be better if a man had acquired more knowledge by raising more children and demonstrated his leadership in a bigger family. That's an opinion that you may hold. But I don't think that you could bind that based upon the Scriptures, just on the way the words are found in the text. So again, would you prefer two or more? Maybe so. But remember, you can't bind what you can't prove. And so we got to tread carefully there. And I really do think that when we look at the way words are used, one child qualifies a man as having children. Now, the next question to ask is having faithful children. What does it mean that he has faithful children? Well, does this mean that they must be Christians? I think so. And I'm going to try to make an effort to prove that he must have children who are Christians. I've talked to some in the past who believe that all that means is that he has children who are devoted to him. They are obedient and submissive and devoted to him as their father. I don't think that's the case. Now, I actually think down here in 1 Timothy 3, having his children in subjection with all gravity, that may go to that point. Here we talked about earlier, there it mentions a plurality of children, and here I think that this may be talking about their familial relationships, and that they are loyal, devoted, submissive children to their earthly father. But I don't think that that's what it means in Titus chapter 1 verse 6 when it refers to faithful children. I think the word faithful children there means that they are Christians. The New American Standard Version says having children who believe. So he has faithful children, he has children who believe. Well, what's that mean? Well, let's look at a couple Bible texts, New Testament texts, and I think we can see what that means. What does it mean to be a believer? In Acts chapter 2, beginning verse 41, then they that gladly received his word were baptized, and the same day were added unto them about 3,000 souls, and all that believed were together and had all things common. It talks about those who had been baptized, and it calls them believers. Believers, and used in this kind of context, suggest that they were Christians, right? Look at another place in 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 16. If any man or woman that believeth have widows, let them relieve them, and let not the church be charged, that it may relieve them that are widows indeed. A man or woman that believeth. Who's it talking about here? Now, obviously, this is talking about a situation where you've got family relatives and they are in physical need. And you're supposed to take care of your family members who are in physical need. A person who is a believer has that obligation. You take care of your family when they have needs, right? Who's that talking about when it calls them believers? Well, it's talking about Christians, right? That clearly refers to Christians. So back to our text, when Titus 1 verse 6 says that he must have faithful children, I believe that we must conclude that it's talking about children who are Christians. He has faithful or believing children. He has children who are Christians. Okay, now again, I think those couple of observations are pretty straightforward. And I'd summarize again, I think one child would qualify based upon the usage of language. I think that believing or faithful children means that they're Christians. He must have children, and he must have among them at least faithful children, Christians, those who are Christians. Now, here's the harder question. And I confess to you right up front, I think this is the much harder question. What if a man has children and they are Christians? He has a plurality of children, and they are Christians. They have obeyed the gospel. They are baptized believers. But at some point, one of them falls away. Just for sake of posing a scenario, here's a man who has 4 children. And as they were being brought up, as they reached accountable age, all of them were taught, all of them responded to the gospel, all of them were baptized. They were all Christians. At some point later, one of them fell away. Would that disqualify the man? Well, first of all, he had 4 children and one fell away. He's still got 3 faithful children, right? I mean, think about that. So if you ask the question, does he have faithful children? Yes, he's got 3. Sadly, one of his children fell away, but he has 3 faithful children. Does he have faithful children? He must be having faithful children. What about that guy with 4 and one fell away? Does he have, if you ask the question, now really use the words the way they're used here, does he have faithful children? He must be having faithful children. Does he have them? And you'd have to say, yes, he has faithful children. We're very upset about this one that fell away, but he at this point in time has faithful children. I think that's one way to look at it, okay? I think that's one way to look at it. Is that ideal? Absolutely not. That is not our preference. That's not our druthers. What we want, I think if I was to express my druthers, what I want is a man who has multiple children and they're all faithful Christians and have been their whole life long, and there's never been a question about any of them. That's obviously our druthers. But could we say that in this scenario of the man who had 4 and one fell away and he still got 3 faithful children, would we say, if the question was asked, does he have faithful children? You'd have to answer that question, yes, he has faithful children. Now, I think there's another side to that question and another consideration to take into account. how did that come to pass? I'm especially focusing on this one who fell away. How did that come to pass? Was it the case with this one who fell away that he was baptized, but he left home on the day that he turned 18, and he never darkened a church building door again, and never has? I would say maybe he didn't rule his own house very well. All right? So this kid, he fell away just as soon as he stepped out the door on his own, and he's never been a faithful Christian since then. I would argue that seems to reflect to this question of how did he rule his own house? How well did he do rearing his children? Now contrast that scenario with one where, and I know a man who had it this way. He had 4 sons, all faithful Christians, and the oldest of them was a gospel preacher. But that guy, that oldest son, when he was well up into his 40s, took a dive off the deep end, left his wife and married another woman, and forsook the Lord altogether. But he was 45 years old when he did that. Does that reflect as much on his father's work as a leader of his family, bringing that child up? Does that reflect as much on him as the kid who, just as soon as he stepped out the door, never visited a church again as long as he lived? To me, I see a difference in those two things. Now, I got to tell you, that guy whose 45-year-old son left the faith, he would not serve. He believed it disqualified him. And I think some people may very well think that disqualified. You're going to have to decide that. You're going to have to decide that, how you feel about it. And I just want to repeat again that I think if we had our druthers, there's no doubt about it, we'd want a man with a plurality of children and all of them faithful all their lives long, with no questions ever raised about that sort of thing. That'd be our druthers. The question is, what about the real life situations where we have men who have children and maybe one of them has fallen away? Can we still see within this statement that he may qualify because he still has faithful children? What the text doesn't say, and I think what we got to be careful about adding, could you add the word all right here? Having all faithful children. Well, if it said that, that'd be easy, wouldn't it? If he must have all faithful children, no questions. Well, that's where we're going, and we can't do otherwise. That'd be adding to the text, wouldn't it? To add that word in. We can't add that word in. So I'm trying to explain it as I see it. And please understand that that's not an ideal situation in my mind at all. But we've got to be careful about trying to add something in the text that's not there. And again, I'd be glad to talk with you more about that. And I'm very sensitive to your considerations along those lines. That's the way I see it, though. And you've heard me say that before. That's not news to you. As we've talked about these things before, we've talked along those lines. Be glad to talk with you more about it. So having faithful children, I think that qualification probably gets more consideration than any other of the qualifications that are in these two lists. And it's an important one, obviously a very important one. And people are very sensitive about that part of the qualifications, as they well should be. So that's some things to think about. Let's pass on quickly to some other qualifications in the list. He must be vigilant. And the word vigilant means watchful. And actually that is the elder's job. He must be the kind of fellow who is wide awake and perceptive to what's going on. He's watchful. He's vigilant. In Hebrews chapter 13, verse 17, it says, "Obey them that have the rule over you and submit yourselves, for they watch for your souls, as they that must give account, that they may do it with joy and not with grief, for that is unprofitable for you." They watch for your souls. They're a watchful kind of person. You've probably known people who almost are oblivious to anything that happens around them. They just don't pay much attention to anything. They're just kind of going along. This guy, though, in contrast to that, this guy is very watchful. He's paying close attention. In Acts chapter 20, verse 28, Acts 20, verse 28, when Paul was speaking to the elders at Ephesus, he said, "Take heed, therefore, unto yourselves and to all the flock over which the Holy Ghost hath made you overseers, to feed the church of God which he hath purchased with his own blood." Take heed, be vigilant is the idea. So in our text, 1 Timothy 3, verse 2, here's that word, vigilant. The elder is to be vigilant or watchful. Obviously, we're talking about spiritual dangers that may present themselves to the flock that he is overseeing. And so he's got to be watchful for those kind of things. And I think you'd agree with me that if he's going to be thus vigilant, he'd have to be knowledgeable. He'd have to have good knowledge of the Scriptures. If he's going to sense spiritual dangers, he's got to have a knowledge base that will give him a reason or an ability to make that determination that a danger exists. And so he is vigilant. He's to be temperate. The word temperate means self-disciplined or self-controlled. In Titus, notice, he must be blameless as the steward of God, not self-willed, not soon angry, not given to wine, no striker, not given to filthy lucre, but a lover of hospitality, a lover of good men, sober, just, holy, temperate. There's our word, temperate. And that word suggests self-disciplined or self-controlled. And so an elder, he's going to be watching for us, right? He's going to be on the lookout for anything that may affect us or be a problem with us. But he obviously has to watch himself too. No leader can be effective. And nobody is going to follow him very well when he tells others to do what he's not doing himself. You know, that was the problem with the hypocritical Pharisees in the day of Jesus. They were quick to tell everybody else what they ought to be doing, and they wouldn't apply those principles to themselves. And so this temperate man controls himself, and he's going to live the way he's encouraging others to live. He's self-controlled. He's a sober individual. And this word sober does not have to do with drinking intoxicants or alcohol. We're going to talk some about that before we get done with these qualifications. But this word sober means to be of sound mind and judgment. Notice, he is to be sober, the text says. And actually, Titus uses the same term. He's to be a sober individual. So he's of sound mind. He has good judgment. He's the kind of guy that if you had an important decision to make in your life, you'd like to know what would advise you to do. You value his judgment. He has demonstrated that he's a wise individual, and he's of sound mind, and he makes good judgments, and you'd be glad to seek his input into some important decision that you are making. You just respect him like that. He is sober-minded. Now, that's not to mean that he can't ever crack a smile, never tells a joke, has absolutely zero sense of humor. Well, we're not saying that that's a requirement at all. But on the other hand, he's the kind of an individual who knows to be serious when the situation demands being serious. I knew a fellow years ago who so desperately wanted to be an elder in a local congregation. And yet he was the kind of guy, I mean, he never was serious about anything. He was always joking. You could never get him to engage in a serious, straightforward conversation about important matters. He wasn't sober-minded. And so he wasn't qualified, and that fellow never was named as an elder in the local congregation. I think probably rightfully so, because he failed on that qualification of being sober-minded. An elder is to be of good behavior. I think this just almost goes without saying, doesn't it? That we're looking for a man to be an elder who is of good behavior. We often recite the expression, actions speak louder than words. And it's true for all of us as Christians. We can say that we are servants of the Lord Jesus Christ. We can say that we're Christians. We can claim our discipleship But if our lives are different from what we claim, we can do a lot of harm. All Christians need to be of good behavior, obviously. Certainly an elder, a leader among God's people, needs to be of good behavior. I think that's probably one of the simplest qualifications to understand. And if he is not, and if there are marks on his report card when it comes to good behavior, he's not the guy we're looking for. We want a guy unquestionably good behavior. And then the next one, I think, goes really closely with that. And it's interesting, and this is the last one that we'll try to tackle tonight. He is to be of good report of them which are without. So, good behavior. And that good behavior is even evidenced by people, I think it's talking about people who are not even Christians, know him to be a man of good behavior. So, this would say that good behavior that we were just talking about, that's necessary, is even exhibited before those in the community, outsiders who are not Christians. They know him. He's a man of good behavior. If you ask them, they're not Christians, and they may not have anywhere close to the same kind of values that we have, that we try to live our lives by, but they know this guy. And if you were to ask them to give an unbiased opinion of him, they'd say, I know that guy. I've known him for a long time. We've worked at the same shop for the last 30 years. I'll tell you, that's a good man. He's a good man. I've known him a long time. We've even talked religion before, and we don't agree about religious questions. I'm a Baptist and he's a member of the Church of Christ, and we have debated the necessity of baptism back and forth for 30 years. He's never convinced me and I've never convinced him. I want to tell you something about that guy. He is a good man. That is a good man. That's what we're looking for, right? Wouldn't you agree that we want an individual who everybody who knows him is willing to sign off and say, I mean, brethren in the congregation, certainly, but even people who are not members of the congregation, who know him in the community, would say, that is a good man. Notice, he must have a good report of them which are without. Again, I think that's pretty easy to understand, but obviously a very important qualification for one who would serve as an elder. Well, there's the ones that we'll tackle for our study this evening. The harder one, this first one. That's the harder one. I mean, all of us agree to that. There's lots to consider there, having faithful children. But vigilant or watchful, temperate, self-controlled, sober-minded, sound mind, good judgment. He has good behavior, and everybody who knows him, Christian and non-Christian, everybody who knows him, say that's a good man. Those are all worthy things for us to consider as we think about the qualification of elders. Thanks for your good attention to what we've had to say. Be glad to talk with you at any time about any of those things. And I know that some of those things we even talked about tonight, there are differing opinions on some of those things. I'm fully aware of that. But I can only tell you the way I understand it, and the way it seems to fit and work as I've studied those things. Ask me later any questions that you might have. I'd be glad to talk with you about it. We're going to end our lesson, sing a song of invitation. For all who hear, make sure your life is right with God. If that means you need to obey the gospel, we hope you'll make that decision. If you're a Christian already but you need the prayers of the saints, let us know so we can help you while we stand and sing this song.